there's no atmosphere on the moon. The light is not reflecting on like particles in the air. That's why the shadows are so pitch black. Just from the reports from Apollo missions, for example, if something is falling down and it's in the shadow, you cannot see it. It's just lost. That is something, of course, that is really dangerous.
So you could actually step into a shadow, but it's not just a shadow, it's a hole.
I think that's why we try to develop something with AR, for example, to give like the astronauts a better view, to just enable them to kind of see something that could be a hazard and they cannot see it. I think that's why it's really important that I'm doing the work that I'm doing.
Hello and welcome to Spatial Realities, your podcast for XR, spatial computing and the metaverse. This is our XR in Space special, where we are diving into extended reality in the space industry. I'm Thomas Riedel, your tech journalist and host from Cologne. And in this episode, we kick off the series with the person who's partly responsible for inspiring me starting this series in the first place. She is a human-centered AI and XR researcher, a doctoral candidate at the European Space Agency, and she was a visiting researcher at the Space Exploration Initiative at MIT Media Lab and is currently collaborating with MIT with various space topics. Welcome to the podcast, Leonie Bensch.
Hi, everyone. It's really nice that I can be on a podcast and we have a chat about really interesting topics together.
Absolutely. When I want to be very bold to other people, I say, I've already spoken with a person who's developing augmented reality for astronauts walking on the moon. This usually is enough to blow their mind. And we will talk about that later. But first, of course, we have to talk about SpaceCai, a conference where you have been the conference chair.
Yes. Also
together with Tommy Nielsen and Albrecht Schmidt. The fourth version happened this year. You invited me also, Tommy, which I'm very grateful for because I was able to see a lot of interesting talks and keynotes and network with scientists and researchers working on some kind of space tech. And most important, I was able to see a real astronaut again, Matthias Maurer, which is always a highlight for me. If you can meet an astronaut, do it. Very impressive, always very impressive. And as far as I understand, this was the first time that there was an astronaut taking part at the SpaceCai, right?
Actually, I'm not sure. And but first of all, we had two astronauts. So we had Matthias Maurer and then Andreas Morgensen.
True.
He also went to ISS already. Yeah, but I think this year we had a lot of really interesting people. And I mean, also the location was related to astronauts. And that was really the first time that we did the conference at the European Astronaut Center.
I mean, they're almost living there. So it's...
Yeah.
It's very easy for them to just come by because it's just the next door, right? So it was a very good idea to be there. And also, we had two astronauts actually. And as you've been an essential part of the management team, maybe you should explain a little bit how the conference actually came to be and why it happened in Cologne.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So initially, what you already mentioned was that the SpaceCai started as a workshop at the CHI conference. So CHI is like the largest conference on human-computer interaction in the world. And some colleagues at MIT, they thought about creating a CHI, but for space topics. Because, of course, space is like a topic that is really interesting to a lot of people, but not a lot of researchers are doing research about that. And there, the idea was born to kind of create a new community where like people could join and could share their research on space, but especially related to human-computer interaction. And then it kind of developed from a workshop to like a separate conference at MIT at the Media Lab that took place, I think, 2 years ago. Then Tommy Nielsen, he's like a really great colleague, and we organized together the conference this year. Like we went to the conference 2 years ago at the Media Lab, And then we were like just joking around, and we're like, okay, hey, we have astronauts in Cologne and we have like this great location. Shouldn't we maybe organize a Space Sky at the European Astronaut Center in like 1 or 2 years? And that was how the idea was born. And now for future editions, we also think, for example, about doing the conference again in the US and kind of always choosing a location related to space and to bring in more interested people there.
There was a gap of 2 years, so there was initially not planned to do another version, and then you just took over, or why was there a gap?
I think that there was always the plan to do another version, but of course, like organizing a conference is like a lot of work. And if you organize it, then it needs to be 100% perfect. And also you need to invite the people, you need to prepare, for example, the proceedings. So where do you publish the papers? You need to invite keynote speakers. And of course, that takes time. And that's why we took a little bit longer this time.
Yes, and you invited a lot of people actually. How many were there? And it was 2 days, which is also quite long, to be honest.
Yeah, so I think at the end we had around like 90 people attending the conference. And then we also had the keynote speakers and so on. So it was, I think, a quite large event. I think, and I think that was awesome because
from
we
all
also
around
had
the
like,
world also.
Yes, that was something that we really wanted to achieve, kind of, that like people come from all around the world and also experts from the domain. And I think that was really interesting and really valuable for like the whole community, that we have like a place where we can share the research, can think about new projects, new ideas together. And I think that's like the key part. And I think like when we were standing there in front of all the people and all the experts, it was really worth everything at the end. Because, I think it was great to kind of bring all the people together.
So you and Tommy, I think you have been the main organizers of the topics and curated everything. What was important for you when you took over the program?
I think the most important part was there that we kind of include a lot of different topics and also topics that are maybe a little bit underrepresented. So, for example, there's a lot of research on robots or something like that. But also, for example, in your podcast right now, there's also the topic of XR. And I think it's really interesting if you have like this combination of different experts and different domains and so on. And there are oftentimes also overlaps. So, for example, where you could apply XR to like a robotic theme or something, or topic or something like that. And then if you have like these different perspectives, that could also help to kind of come up with new topics and new research ideas, for example. Yeah. And I think for like the whole list of topics, we also kind of looked at past versions. So what kind of topics were suggested, what topics were already discussed or something like that.
And so you looked at the topics of the last editions and also the workshops and so on. From a perspective of today, how much was this maybe the conference with the most XR in it? What role will XR or played XR this time? And what I'm also interested in, does that mean that it probably will be more XR? Will it less XR? Trying to understand the role of XR here.
Yes, so I think XR was a huge topic, and I think we had like 2 separate sessions just on XR, if I remember correctly. And I think it becomes more and more important. I think XR is something. I mean, I'm also working on XR on my PhD, so I know a lot about the topic, and I think it's something that becomes more and more important. And of course, then the next conference will also focus more on that. So, for example, for next conference, we also thought about a different kind of tracks where you can submit something maybe. It's still under discussion, so it's not a final decision yet. But I think XR is something where also like a lot of future researchers will work on, especially related to space. Because, I think XR, for example, is like location independent. So you can use it for training, you can use it also in space. And of course, with the right technology and so on. But also there, the development is kind of improving and the technology is improving. So I think it has a huge potential at the end.
Yeah, and it's also combining a lot of technologies from other branches, like you said already, robotics or AI. So XR seems to be some kind of like a merger of different technologies to bring it to the people. So maybe for example, the perfect interface for AI. Maybe that's just a natural that it gets more and more. And then I think it was even more than 2 slots in your conference. I think it was 5 or 6, not always exclusively XR. But for example, Manuel Maurer, of course, also spoke about VR and Luna, that they use it there.
Yeah.
Of course, very important. We will talk about that in a minute, like about Luna and what you have been doing there, also with augmented reality on the moon. Yeah, so Space Kai 4.0 was very nice. I was also very, very lucky that I was accidentally in the same city. I could go there by train, just half an hour, so easy for me to participate. And of course, if it will ever happen again to be in Cologne, good for me. But I also understand, of course, that you want to make it accessible to the whole world. From the participants, was this already like, did you already scrape everybody together who is working in XR or human-computer interfaces on the world? And that's the whole set of people? Or how big is this actually, this topic?
I think it depends a little bit if you are talking about space or if you are talking about XR research in general. So I would say there are a lot of experts out there on XR in general. And of course, all their research or most of their research findings you could also apply to space. And on the other hand, I would say, of course, at the conference, there were only like some experts right now, because I think for the next version, we also want to advertise the conference more, and then there will be even more experts coming. So right now, as you said, we had a lot of international experts and also like really high-profile people there. But of course, that could be improved even more.
Yeah. What do you think is the main difference between XR in general, XR research in general, and an XR research in space? Is there a difference?
Yes. Yeah. There's absolutely a difference. So for space, it's way more safety critical. So if you think about an astronaut in space, like if you are talking, for example, on a technology level, then the whole XR system needs to be really, really, really reliable and really safe. And then there's also nearly no backup. So on Earth, if you are just using it for fun, if it's not working, then you can just buy another HMD, or you can just put off the goggles or something like that. In space, that's not possible. So we need to think from the technology side about making it really reliable and robust so that it works every time 100%. And if you talk about, for example, the interaction, it's also more safety critical. So, for example, if you think about using it just for like fun at home, for example, playing Beat Saber or something like that, then of course you don't have any safety critical aspect there. It's just fun. And if something is not that intuitive or not that, like there's some error or something like that, that is not that important. Like then maybe people will not use it at the end or something like that, or will play another game. But in space, if you design something, then you also need to think about a lot of emergencies. So just to think about the situation, for example, you're an astronaut on ISS and there's like an emergency, and then you have like, for example, an AR interface or something like that, and it's suggesting something wrong, or it's like overlaying something where you would need to see something, for example, I don't know, some fire extinguisher or something like that. Then of course that is something that cannot happen. Like that's not possible. Like you need to make sure if you design or develop something like that at the beginning that it's like 100% working and 100% reliable, and also like autonomous kind of. So without requiring any kind of external input most of the time.
Yeah, what I was already learning is that if you take a normal HMD from the Earth and put it on the ISS, it won't work because the sensors think something is wrong with the world. So even that might be different. You need to design it differently. and change things which actually worked on planet Earth?
Yeah, so the team I'm collaborating with at the European Astronaut Center, they tested different headsets. And I was also part of a parabolic flight campaign, for example, I think 2 years ago, where they tested a headset. And most of them are not working. I think they found one that is actually working, but I currently don't know the name. Yeah, but I think like the main factor there was that the sensors are calibrated to the gravity on Earth, and then if you change kind of the location and there's no gravity anymore, then it's not working anymore.
I already spoke with Pale Blue CEO Felix Gorbatsevich about it. Dear listeners, check out the next episode, XR in Space, Immersive Tech for Space Simulators with Pale Blue. It's already online. You can listen a little bit about the problems of headsets in space.
I think Felix was on another parabolic flight. So the team at ESA, they are doing like, I think nearly every year, they are doing a parabolic flight, testing their new equipment. For example, there was also one colleague who tested his own built VR headset. And I think that was really interesting because they had the issue that like it was like the consumer stuff isn't working. They tried to build their own one to kind of go around all the different issues that you have. And I think that's really interesting. I currently cannot find the paper, but I could look it up afterwards and then...
No problem. Yeah. Cool. All right. Yeah. We see. That's very interesting. There are differences between XR on Earth and in space. And sometimes we use XR on Earth to simulate stuff which will be important later in space. So we don't always need to be in space. But before we talk about all that, I love very much to speak about, in this podcast, to speak about the personal history of our interview partners. Leonie, and you probably have also your own story how you came to XR. What was your first contact to XR, and was it like a virus infecting you? Was it blowing you away? What was your first experience with XR?
Oh, that's a little bit complicated. So I actually have a background in psychology. So I initially started to be kind of really interested in human factors. So, for example, I don't know if you know all the documentaries about air traffic crash, so airplane crash. Like there's like one famous TV show called Mayday.
Never seen.
And okay, I can really recommend it. So that was how I came to kind of being interested in this whole human-computer interaction topic. So how do people interact with technology? Why is there an error sometimes? Why do people mess something up with technology? And then, I started to go more into the human-computer interaction direction and started an internship at ESA, at the European Astronaut Center, and they worked a lot with XR. That's like my interest was born, basically. I always was really interested in computer games and so on. And at the XR lab at the European Astronaut Center, they are doing a lot of astronaut training, for example, with XR. Like my topic there during the internship already was that I had a look at brain-computer interfaces for astronauts, but also how we can design a head-up display for astronauts with XR, for example.
Yeah.
And I was so interested that the supervisor suggested then that if I maybe want to do a PhD in that direction. And that's like how my interest and my career in XR began.
And then there's usually also a second question you get asked, probably in space podcasts all the time. How did you get infected with a space virus? So 2 viruses here, XR and space.
I think space is something that is, I think, interesting for most people, right? Like I remember when I was like a child, I was always watching like interviews with astronauts and so on. And I think it's something like most humans just want to explore, like what is out there? Are there aliens or something like that? Like initially, but I think it's just a really interesting topic and something where like we can learn something about the universe, and like even if it's just a small contribution, I think it's a cool thing to contribute there. That like maybe the next a man or woman is going on the moon, and I can help with that. I can help them to kind of explore what is on the moon or what is even on Mars or in space in general. And I think that's really something I really like about that.
Yeah.
And also maybe I would also say the safety critical aspect that I mentioned already, so that you really need to make sure that everything is 100% working, and you need to test it, and that it needs to be really reliable, and then you really need to design everything for that. And that is something that is kind of a really hard task to do, and it's like a challenge, but I really like challenges, so I think you almost never have it in another context like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we said about even if it's only a little bit you're contributing, which you do most of the times, most of the people only contribute a little bit. I had a good friend who actually was capable of reducing the mortality of a certain kind of cancer by 0.4%. which over time is a couple of lives, and I think that's worth it. It's a life, and so there's no discussion about it if it is worth or not. I find that very encouraging also, and if you have some kind of purpose like that, and that's awesome. Cool.
I also think a lot of times with space research, I think that it's really important to do that, because a lot of space research that we did for projects in space were then also later used on Earth. Mm-hmm. So I don't have anything in mind right now, but I remember that I visited, for example, a NASA museum, and there was like a whole wall of projects where they developed something, for example, for the Apollo program. And they developed it really safely and robust, because safe in space, it's really, really important. And then they could use it on Earth, and the development wouldn't have been that fast if it would be just developed for Earth, for example. And so that's also my idea also with XR, that I'm not only developing that maybe for space, so that maybe one man or woman is using it, but that we can maybe also do the research and then reapply it to topics on Earth. And I think also for space, Kai, I think that's like a really important topic, right? That it's not that we try to get the essence out of a project and then reapply it to kind of applications or domains on Earth where it also could be important.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think it's totally underestimated how science in space will actually be used already on Earth. So the ISS is a big lab, right? So we're doing all day research to make living on Earth better. So absolutely. And this will also happen with the new space station around the moon, the Gateway space station, which is part of the Artemis program, which just got all its money by the big funky bill, or how is it called, from Trump, big awful bill, but there was Artemis in it, so it's fine. It's funded. That's maybe the good news we have here. Okay, so we heard how you were infected with the XR and space virus. You already also teased that you have been at the German Aerospace Center, but it was actually robotics, right?
I did 2 master's degrees, and one of it was at the German Aerospace Center, and it was about robotics, but there it was more about shared control. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if you are controlling a robot and it's really complicated and you need some support doing that, because, for example, if you control a robot from space, there's also some delay maybe and so on. So you maybe cannot really control it directly. So you can use a computer program, or the computer can support you in doing the task and controlling the robot. It's called teleoperation, remotely, for example. And then I had a look how we can kind of nudge you in a certain direction using force, to help you to kind of control the robot together with the computer.
Yeah. And this was exclusive of XR, but it was just using like controllers and 2D monitors and stuff like that?
Yeah, so the simulation itself was in VR. So people put on like a VR headset, and then they were seeing a scene in VR, and then they did the task with like a real haptic device.
And because it was so delayed, you tried to find out how you can actually use like force feedback, for example, to make the input valuable.
Yeah, I think it's not only about delay, but it's also about just that controlling a robot is really, like, it's not your own hand, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to control a robot, you also don't have any feelings, like how fast is the arm moving. You don't have any feedback most of the time. So that makes it more complicated, because normally it's not a really natural movement. And then if there are, for example, obstacles, there's like a high risk that you touch an obstacle. And of course, if you're, for example, in space and you want to collect a sample or something like that, then that makes it more complicated. So the idea there was that if we add some kind of, for example, based on computer vision or something like that, some kind of support to that, where like the input of like the operator and the aid of the computer, they work together. And so the robot then can be controlled really intuitively, but also safely, so that you are not kind of destroying the sample or something like that at the end.
So you already used VR for this one. Your LinkedIn profile is not telling that, but I think that's totally fine, because it was just a tool for you and it was about robotics. Or where it is, the main thing is about augmented reality for lunar exploration. Maybe we should now talk about that, but because I have the feeling this might be the longest talk about, because it's of course very interesting, and I think that's the project you're still working on, right?
Yeah, that's my main PhD topic.
Yes. So you have then been at the ESA, at European Space Agency, which is, of course, a little bit confusing all the time, because people from German Space Center also are part of ESA, and that's not easy to explain. But then you actually have been doing an internship at the XR lab, where you started that project.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Tell us more about it. What was the setup? How did you start?
Yeah, so at the XR lab, together with Tommy Nielsen, we did a lot of studies with astronauts. And we mainly did that, for example, to evaluate different design solutions for like, at that time, it was like a cargo lander that should be developed by ESA. And I was really interested in VR, but also in XR. And then the idea was, shouldn't we start to just, when we do these studies, shouldn't we start asking people what they think about having AR support during lunar missions? And that's how I started. So I just asked them, what do you think about that? If you would walk on the moon, and then they were immersed in VR on the moon. And then I asked them, what do you think about using a head-up display and, for example, navigational features with AR on the moon? Would that help you? And doing that, it was a lot of fun, and it showed us that it's like a really interesting topic and would really help on the moon. So you need to imagine on the moon there's like really blinding light. So if you look in the sun, there's no atmosphere. So if you look in the sun, then it's really blinding, and the shadows are like pitch black, so you cannot see anything. And then, of course, that was like one main factor where like the first study sessions showed us that like the astronauts and the experts really think that having AR and just showing cues in the real environment could help with kind of mitigating that. So, for example, when you think about having a pitch black spot on the ground, and you would overlay, for example, highlights on rocks in like red or something like that, and of course that could help the astronauts to see the environment without any safety risks and without falling over anything.
Yeah, so it started actually with the Argonaut lunar lander concept, right? Which was a fictional lander you designed to test certain concepts of how to handle landers on the moon. So this was the project where it started.
Yes. So basically the Argonaut, I think it's now even built already by ESA. So there's, for example, a mock-up in the lunar hall of it. But at this time, we had like this VR environment of the moon at ESA, and the idea there was that we just show different design solutions to experts. Like, for example, we built cargo unloading mechanisms or different ladders, and then the experts kind of were immersed in the VR environment, showing the lunar environment and the different designs. And then one key part of my research and also Tommy's research is that we always try to get the human-centered perspective. So that is really important. So that we really ask people, what do they want? How can we make kind of designs and also technologies meaningful for people, so that it's not just some kind of technology that you place in front of a person and then you say use it like that, but that it's really a co-design and a participatory design where people can also give feedback and can co-design stuff with us. And
almost agile, or is that too much or something different?
Yeah, I think as far as correct me if I'm wrong, but agile just means that it's that you kind of adjust the design, right? During the development.
Yeah.
I think it's not only adjusting, but it's also co-developing, so that the participant or the expert or the astronaut really takes the key role. So I, as a designer or developer or human-computer interaction expert, I don't have a passive role, I would say, but I'm just suggesting something, and then there's an interview, like a back and forth. So we are thinking together about a solution that would fit, for example, the astronaut or the expert or the person who would use the technology at the end best. So that at the end they really have the best solution. So it's not about so for example, in the past, I would say a lot of technologies were designed based on a view where you just design something as a designer or developer or expert or something like that. But and then at the end of the development process, you show what you developed or designed, and then the feedback loop maybe starts. So there's maybe then some kind of testing, but then the development is already so far in the process that it's also really hard to kind of correct that. So our approach is always that we start at the first stage wherever it's possible to kind of involve the people who are using the technology at the end. And by the way, I also think that's one key part where XR is really important. Because there you can really just simulate stuff, right? So you could just create with the Argonaut, for example, it was in VR, but there you can really simulate the whole lunar environment. You can simulate different technologies. You can, for Luna, for example, there are projects planned where you just simulate different objects and you overlay them in the lunar hall on the ground. So you don't need to build them. You just create them digitally, and then you kind of overlay it, and they can test it, and they can play around. They can even change it,
which is
like in real life.
Yeah, which is very important, especially in space tech, because everything is very expensive there usually.
Yeah.
So you can, in a very cheap way, simulate things. VR is like the simulator of everything. So the quality of a simulation is the only limit, let's say, and the size of your computer to actually do that. And I think one of your testers was actually Alexander Gerst, right?
Yes. Yeah. So we are testing a lot of people, a lot of astronauts. And I have to say that they really, really give valuable feedback, because it's different when you are let's say normal person in comparison to if you have the training for an astronaut suit, for example, and B, if you have been in space. So, for example, I remember one study that we did, I think, with Luca Parmitano, and we evaluated, for example, in VR the design of a ladder. And the only really negative aspect of VR, for example, is that you could, but it's like really difficult. You could simulate haptic stuff. So for example, that you really feel the different parts of the ladder when you step on them. But it's really difficult. And he was like there and was like telling us, wait, you could not use that with like a real astronaut suit because it's too small or something like that. And that would be something that, it's obvious, but as someone who has never been to space or has not used an astronaut suit for like multiple hours, is really difficult to know that. And
it's like when you are a man 1.83 meters high, you have a totally different perspective on things. For example, you go into a co-working space and the tables are great and the chairs are great. And then there's a person who's 1.50 meters high and enters the space. And suddenly everything is too big. Everything is too high. And just this little small thing, which happens every day, could actually change how you design something. That seems like a very small thing, but it's actually not. It's very important to know that. And that sounds also like something like if you are not a person in that role, living that role, being in that role, stepping in reality in space, a ladder, you have never done that, it's almost impossible for you to actually find out if it works or not. And,
and I think that's like a really important point that we have XR there where we can just simulate stuff. And then astronauts can tell us directly with like minimal effort, it's working or it's not working, or we need to put, I don't know, the ladder more to the left or to the right, or for example, with like my PhD topic with AR for like astronaut helmets, where we show, for example, navigational cues, or for example, now I'm doing a study on terrain awareness features. So for example, how we can like, is it useful, for example, to highlight different elements in the environment if it's in the shadow, for example? So for example, rocks, or if you overlay a grid on the environment, is it helping you, for example, to judge distances a little bit better? Because that was an issue that appeared during the Apollo missions quite often.
Before we speak about that, you need to maybe explain the really extraordinary situation you are there at the European Astronaut Center. Because there's also the XR lab, and then there are astronauts training next door. So it's quite just easy to grab one, put them a headset on and say, test it. What's the XR lab actually? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the XR lab is working, as the name says, on a lot of different XR topics. And for example, they are having a look at using XR for training astronauts, but also, for example, they did like a VR mock-up of the lunar hall.
Before it was even built?
Yeah, before it was even built. Yeah. So they are doing a lot of different topics. And they also have quite often other people, like students, for example, working on new topics that could be relevant. And I think that is one thing that I really like about the XR Lab, that you always have like the newest technology. And if you have like a crazy idea, you can just suggest, hey, let's do this and that. It sounds a little bit funny, but just try it out. And I think that is something that is really great. So I remember that like one of my supervisors, he always said it's like a little bit like skunk works. So where people try out different stuff and then maybe like a few projects are not working, but like a lot of different other ideas are great and really bringing like research or like actually the astronauts at the end forward in what they are doing.
I mean, we are talking about space, so of course it's a little bit like the holodeck, right? Like you can test everything at the holodeck, and if there's the XR lab is maybe what we would call the holodeck in the very, very, very far future. You just load something in, test something, and that's very cool. So it's right at the European Astronaut Center where you have been working, and the astronauts are around. And just vis-a-vis the road, they built the big hall, the lunar hall, also, which is completely digitized in VR, which also gets shared with all the projects. They can also test stuff before they bring the real vehicle there. One thing I'm really struck, and I think a lot of people do not understand it because it's totally different here on Earth, and you mentioned it already, is why are shadows dangerous on the moon?
I think there's no, yeah, it's a little bit complicated, but as far as I know, there's no atmosphere on the moon. And then the shadows, like the light is not reflecting on like particles in the air, for example. And that's why the shadows are so pitch black and the sun angle is also different.
Very deep.
Yeah, and then, of course, just from the reports from Apollo missions, for example, like if something is falling down and it's in the shadow, then it's like really, you cannot see it. You're like, it's just lost. That is something, of course, that is really dangerous.
So you could actually step into a shadow, but it's not just a shadow, it's a hole.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. I think that's why we try to develop something with AR, for example, to give like the astronauts a better view, to just enable them to kind of see something that could be a hazard and they cannot see it. Yeah, I think that's why it's really important that I'm, for example, doing the work that I'm doing. Because it's really something safety critical. And as you said, you don't want to fall into some kind of ditch somewhere, because then you maybe in an astronaut suit, you can maybe not get up again.
You stumble and then, or you damage something on your suit because you hit a rock or something.
Yeah, but of course they also have like really strong helmet lights. So of course, like if an astronaut is doing an extravehicular activity and is walking on the moon, then like there are really high safety standards. So I would just assume that they also wouldn't go into an area where it's like pitch black and they cannot see anything, but they would have like helmet lights where they would kind of see what is in front of them. But of course, it's always good to have like another technology, another layer of safety added, and that could help you to maybe also push that boundary a little bit, like increase it a little bit, so that you can go also in an area that you would normally not go with just a helmet light in the future.
Matthias Maurer on the Space Sky conference said that they were thinking putting lights on the shoes and also on the belt to even make it better. But he said even that might not be enough. So if you are just one big light bulb, it seems that it's not even enough to light the shadows, because it's really different when you do not have any atmosphere. The light gets not scattered, and a shadow is dark. It's just really dark. So I found that very interesting. So what was your approach from a technological standpoint? What the technologies do you use for this augmented reality headset? Where is the data coming from? How is the communication happening? So maybe tell a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because that is one huge issue with the technology at the end. At the beginning of my PhD, I was thinking a lot about that, and also how we can, like from a technology viewpoint, we could maybe really build something like that, maybe in 3 years or so. But then I realized, okay, it's a really difficult thing to really build, for example, AR lenses and really build them into an astronaut helmet. Because you have this blinding light, for example, and like the really dark spots. So, for example, the contrast that you need to kind of allow for at the end, like the AR features, they would need to be visible in like blinding light, but also like really dark shadows. That's like something that is really not there right now from a technology standpoint, I would say.
You mean like the displays are not here? Like you look into the sun on the moon, but the sun is like 5,000 lumen and our displays are only 500 or so.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you don't see anything.
Yeah. And then also the positioning, for example. So, for example, what I'm doing right now with the terrain awareness features, where you overlay, for example, something on a rock, and it's like highlighted in red or something like that. Of course, there are like a lot of computer vision algorithms out there that could help you with that. But at the end, like one thing that like all of my research showed was that it needs to be 100% reliable. So if you think, for example, about just highlighting one rock and then not highlighting another one, then the tool is basically not that useful. So what I'm doing in my research right now is like limiting the factor of technology. So it's more about if we could have a technology that is doing that would work, how would it look in the best case? And then we go backwards to develop the technology. So it's more about showing that there's like a need and how should it look like, and then coming up with the technology, because that's like the main issue, that the technology is not there yet.
So you simulate the technology we need to develop to find the use case.
Yes. What I'm doing right now, for example, is simulating most of it in VR. So we have this lunar environment. And then I'm simulating the lunar environment with all the shadows, all the lights, and so on in VR. And then just also from like a developer perspective, it's super easy to then test different AR features in VR, let's say. I know the concept of like simulating AR and VR is sometimes confusing for people, but I think it's something that is again like one benefit of all the technology that we have, that you can easily change stuff. Like people can say, for example, where I'm overlaying a grid on the environment to help people to judge distances, they can just tell me, I want to have the grid in blue. I want to have the grid in yellow. I want to have the grid bigger. And I don't need to worry about any environmental factors there, because I have the moon just simulated. And it's just a few clicks to change, for example, an Unreal Engine, the color of the grid or something like that.
Yeah.
And then the people can basically show me really, really easily what they want to have.
So mainly your work is actually software-based, within a headset, simulating augmented reality headsets to understand how the interface and the representation, for example, of the moon's surface should look so that people have the most use of it. And are you already done, or do you have some results from that? So which color is the best ones? And do women prefer different colors than men on the moon?
That's a good question. Yeah, so it was really interesting, because again, what kind of all this research showed me was that as a designer or developer, you have like your own perspective, and you think that's right. It should be like that. And then you're testing like, I don't know, 30 experts and astronauts and like people who really know the topic and really have been in space. And then like the result is completely different. You're like at the end like, okay, that really makes sense. But I don't have the experience to kind of come to that conclusion. So for example, I tested navigational features, and like the first thing you can maybe think of is that you have like a line on the ground, for example, that is just showing you the path from like the starting point to the end point. But like what I could show is that is not really the best solution, because if you have a path on the ground that was proposed, for example, by other research before and also tested, for example, in like a real environment, like with a lot of technology development and so on. So what I could show is that the path is not really the best solution, just because you cannot really see what is underneath. So if there is, for example, a big rock under the path, then you're falling over it. And or there's like a lot of experts told me what would be really interesting would also be to analyze geological samples. Like that is one task that astronauts do a lot of the times. And it's also restricting. So like all the people were telling me, okay, if there's like a path and it's like really accurate, then there must be a reason why I should stay close to it. So at the end, like one approach from navigating that worked best was like just use waypoints, like in a computer game. So that like the astronauts can move around freely, but they need to go to different checkpoints, but can decide themselves how they go there. And I think that is really one thing that was also new, because like this path, for example, was like something that a lot of people used before and never thought about. Is that really something we should do?
As I also learned on your Space Sky conference was that distance is very hard to judge on the moon because also light not being dissipated, and so you do not have any mist, for example, because you don't look through air and things change. Light changes the far away it is, so you can judge about the distance. Did you also in your work look at that and how to communicate that? Like, was there also on the points some information about the distance or something like that?
Yeah. So like the distances are really hard to judge because you also don't have any landmarks. Like when you think about Earth, you have like houses and trees and
the Kölner Dom, of course.
Yeah, the Kölner Dom, yeah. And you know how like tall it is, and then okay, it should be around 10 meters or something like that if I see a house, but on the moon there's nothing. So like one idea there that I'm currently exploring is what I already mentioned, like overlaying a grid with like a fixed size or even a size that you can adjust. So for example, you can adjust the color, the size, and so on. And then, of course, you can judge how far something away just because you know how large like one grid part is. And the other part is that I'm also exploring now, and that where we have like really good feedback is that you just highlight, for example, rocks, but then basically combine it with like a LiDAR vision approach. So, for example, with LiDAR, like a robot view where like different depth settings are displayed in different colors, for example, or can be displayed. And then the idea was, for example, that you have like some color coding. So that rocks are not only highlighted as like an obstacle, but that you also add like a color coding to it, where it's like highlighted, like the outline, for example, is highlighted in orange. And then oh, okay, it's an obstacle, but it's also 10 meters away. And I think
or like if I go there, I will suffocate because I don't have any oxygen left or something like that.
Oh yeah, that was also one idea that came up quite often, and I think that would be really useful, that you have like a radius that is displayed in the real environment where you can see, okay, I can go there safely and I can also go back or something like that.
There's a point of return.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is also very important in space, of course.
Yeah. And like that is maybe also one thing regarding head-up displays, for example, that I also explored a lot what kind of information you want to have in your field of view. So, for example, when you think about having information about oxygen or, I don't know, water or something like that directly in your field of view, it's really good because you can see the information, but it could also be like a little bit confusing because it could overlay anything in your real environment. So the question is, of course, what you want to display and how to display it. So at what kind of position do you want to activate it? Do you want to deactivate it at certain kind of time points? And that was something that was, I think, especially in the space domain, not explored before. So, for example, one thing that seems to be really crucial is that the astronaut can always deactivate all the AR features and the head-up display, because if you think about an emergency and then or like something is going on and if there's something blocking your vision, then that's of course like really really bad, and you don't want to have that. Or for example, for different sensor values, for example, if you think about seeing your own heartbeat, that could also do something to you, right? Like if you see your heart rate is increasing,
it increases even more.
Yeah, yeah. I think at the end we're then also at the like topics of adaptive interfaces. So, for example, that you show different kind of information or different AR cues in the environment, depending on the situation, but also on kind of depending on factors that the astronaut is determining. But then you can also implement something like testing something during training. And then basically an AI learns how the astronaut is behaving or what the preferences are, and then you apply it later on during the real mission or something like that. And basically, the more information you have and the more options you have, the better. I think that is something that I really want to look into in the future. That that like how can we use information to kind of make these systems also more adaptive and like even more supportive at the end.
Right across the street, you already built, with you, I mean the European Space Agency, right across the street from the European Astronaut Center, there's already a big hall with a lot of regolith, which is pretty similar of what you will find on the moon. And you could also walk around there. Did you have the chance to put all your simulations on a HoloLens, give it to Manuel Maurer, and he walks through Luna to check it out if this actually works? Is this something you can do?
Yeah, so I didn't do that, but you could do that. So there are several projects already planned. So, for example, Tommy Nielsen is already working on such a project. I'm also involved in that. So we are basically working on something where we use AR and simulate different stuff in Luna. And then also test different design solutions again. But then but there we have not have VR, but we have like this mix between the real Luna hall and the real Luna. They also have like a sun simulator and like a gravity offloading system where you can hop around like a real astronaut would do.
Still in building, but soon, yeah.
Like we are planning to kind of combine XR with the real lunar environment, with like the real moon, where everything is like simulated and real. And I think that's like one thing that is really unique, I would say, in Europe. I don't know. I think there are also some other analog facilities in Europe, but I think that's like unique to Luna, that you can really just go there and test your stuff. And I think Matthias also mentioned during his keynote that it's like open to most of the people. So you can propose something, and then they basically see if there's like a slot free. Yeah, I think that's great. If you have a good idea, and if then you can just go there and test it.
I think there was a talk. At one point I was very full of information, so some things get a little bit cloudy here. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there was a talk about gathering information on the moon in real time while you walk there, sending them back to Earth, processing it, and sending information back to the helmet of the astronaut. Was that a project was on the stage, or do I hallucinate about that?
I'm also not sure. Like there were so many really good projects. I don't know, but I think this idea that you, for example, have like a LiDAR camera, for example, attached to the astronaut suit, and then you of course not real time, but you collect information. Then you send it back, and you create a digital twin of the lunar environment or the Martian environment or something like that. I think that's a really, really good idea. Because then, for example, experts on Earth, like geologists or somebody like that, they could explore the data, and they would basically have a digital twin, and could then also use VR to kind of explore nearly real time, together with the astronaut, the remote environment. And I think that's really fascinating. And I think regarding AR, if you want to display AR cues, but you need to send something back to Earth and then back to the astronaut, I think that's something that's maybe not that realistic, because then you have like this delay. And if you...
Even with Gateway?
Yeah, maybe with Gateway, but then you would need to send it from the moon to Gateway and back. And then the question would be, I think there's, for example, for I actually don't know if there's like, let's say black spot where like the communication is lost or something like that. So, but I think like one part that I could show, and like that all the experts told me during my study session, was always that if you can do it locally, because if there's some kind of connection loss, or there's some latency, some delay in it, then there's always the risk that it's not working, or there's some package loss or whatever, and then you kind of risk that something is going wrong.
Yeah, because gathering the information is also very crucial right now. you can just simulate that stuff in VR easy. But of course, in the future, we have maybe some more satellites around the moon. So we can get very precise information, or as we did on the Mars, maybe have little drones flying around, gathering real-time information. Could also be something. And then you don't need it in real time. You can send it package by package to Earth, crunch it with big servers or parks, and then send it back again, right? Something like that.
Yeah, or you have a rover, for example, with sensors, and then you're not risking the astronauts. The rover is just driving around or like flying around on Mars or something like that. And then you have like a 3D map at the end, and then that's of course really useful for planning. But that would also be maybe a way for like these AR features to work at the end, so that because you need really detailed information. Otherwise, it's like not realistic, I would say, that you can use it.
Yeah. For me, this sounds you're just getting started. There's so much to do, so much open questions of how to do things. We were just talking about augmented reality in the headset, but of course you're also there will be a little station on the moon. There is a station orbiting around the moon. So the moon seems to me like something where XR or our missions or future missions to moon might be something where XR is heavily in need to support all the missions, all the new technology we need to safely go there. Is that just my impression, or do you think the same?
I think it makes a lot of stuff easier. So, of course, you could go like the old way and just prepare a train on Earth and all the different things that were done in the past. And I think especially XR also helps a lot with training, for example. So that if you have like, for example, a procedure or something like that you can just easily train new procedures. You can send kind of new instructions or something like that. You can display them really intuitively. So I would say it's something that makes like future missions easier and more intuitive. And also with like future missions, they will be way more complex. So for Apollo, it was just like going to the moon, walking around, and then flying back, basically. But I think for like future missions, it will be more complex, longer missions. At the end, I think there's also this plan that we maybe can build like a
base,
a lunar base or something like that, and then maybe even launch from the moon to Mars or something like that. So it becomes more complicated, and of course, then you need to have more support, more intuitive support. And I think XR is great for that.
Yeah. They plan Artemis base camp to land the first module in 2030. I just read that in the Wikipedia article preparing this talk. So, there shall be a base camp one time in the near future. Yeah, I think we could continue talking about what is possible there. I don't know if we need to mention something else you are working on, maybe some future things. Of course, we will have SpaceSky 5.0 sometime in the future. You will probably inform everybody when you have some dates about it. Anything else we should know about your work, which is important, which is close to your heart, or everybody should know?
Yeah, I think one thing that is really important, I think I mentioned that sometime before, that really the work that I'm doing really is because there's the support from the astronauts and the experts. And I think it's great to collaborate with them and to kind of learn from them. And then, I really also like this kind of interdisciplinary thing. So that like in general, like a lot of people from different backgrounds, they come together and develop something together, and then together with like the astronaut, for example, so that we can really build something that is helping them in the best way and to make it safer, more intuitive, more meaningful for them. Because at the end, it's always that the main goal is that the astronaut is safe and that the astronaut uses the technology at the end. I think that's the main part. And that's like the main kind of summary that I would give, that if you want to design something for the moon or develop something, you really need to make sure that all the different stakeholders are involved, and the end users, so the astronauts, because they are the people using the technology at the end. And if they won't use it, then everything was not worth it, like the whole development. So I'm really happy that I got so much support from them, and that everybody is such a great team working on that.
Yeah, teamwork makes the dream work even more in space. So yeah, really nice to hear how you all work together. And of course, as you're doing XR in space, yeah, let's see. Maybe one part of your research will be actually on the moon. Can't wait to see things happening actually in space from your research. And yeah, if you want to talk to Leonie or contact her or meet her, you can of course write her an email or contact her on LinkedIn. She's very open about that. But the even more clever way would be to apply for the XR AI hack, taking place in August 17th to 19th in Cologne, right before Gamescom, because Leonie will be one of our jury members like last year. So go to xrhack.com and find out more about the hackathon and apply for free and learn a lot. Thank you very much, Leonie, for joining, and see you very soon in Cologne.
Thanks.